Ultimate Fan Podcast. I'm your host, Frank Osberger, and on today's show, we're going to discuss the winter meetings as they have begun this morning. So, last night, um, watching MLB Network, I just wanted to acknowledge Jeff Kent, who, was the Hall of Fame inductee yesterday. As far as the contemporary committee is concerned, I know a lot of people either haven't heard of that or they don't really like the way that goes down. Tell you the truth, I mean, it is what it is. It's not perfect, but I think it gives guys another shot to get in, and I think it's pretty cool that Jeff Kent got in. He had the most home runs by a second baseman. He had, I believe it was a 17-year career, was a great Dodger, a great San Francisco Giant, really never took off with the Mets. So I know that's something that I was texting my friends about last night as he got the news, as we all did. But I think it was pretty cool, nonetheless, that they gave him that honor. I think it's a lot of guys should get those opportunities. Shout out to Carlos Delgado, who had 9 votes. He was about 4 or 5 shy of hitting the mark as well to get in. So hopefully next year or whenever they do this ballot again, Carlos Delgado gets a shot to make the Hall of Fame, because I think every Met fan would love that. He was a prolific home run hitter back when I was a kid growing up. So, just to have more of those guys that made an impact on the game to get in, it would be really cool. So, again, congratulations to Jeff Kent. And let's talk about the winter meetings. So, nothing has developed quite yet. I keep looking at my phone. I was looking at it all of last night when I was at work, doing a graveyard shift. I usually keep tabs on a lot of the rumor mills and a lot of the websites and Twitter and all this stuff. Stuff is starting to develop a little, but nothing yet as far as any big signings or any big trades. As far as the Mets are concerned, there's a couple of things that I thought were interesting that they brought up yesterday. They seem to be in on Framber Valdez, starting pitcher from the Houston Astros. So I'm not completely sold on the fact that they're in on him. I know a whole bunch of insiders have been saying that the Mets were one of the 3 teams that were talking to him at the meetings, and which is interesting enough. It's between the Mets, the Giants, and the Orioles. Can see him going to the Orioles just to stay in the American League, if that's something that he would do. I could see the Orioles making a push for that. But I really think it might be a 2-team race for Framber's services. Obviously, I think the Mets could beat them out, that being the Orioles, as a landing spot, only because of the money and the fact that I think we would give him a better contract. And why wouldn't he want to come pitch in New York? Just the market value, I think, would be better than Baltimore. But, if the Giants are in on him, I can see the Giants making a strong push and giving him more years, which is probably going to be the difference. If it's a annual salary, that's going to be the driving force in where he decides to go. Then I see the Mets being a pretty good spot for him. I can see them giving him a deal, kind of like what they gave Verlander and Scherzer, like that 2 to 3 year deal with a really high annual salary. That could be something that I can see the Mets doing with Framber Valdez if they're actually in on him. Which, um, until that heats up, I'm not gonna hang my hat on any of the analysts yet because that was just early speculation. Um, so we'll see. If the Mets do get a guy like that, I would be pretty excited only because, he's an innings eater and we need a guy like that. Obviously, starting pitching should be at the utmost importance this winter meetings for the Mets. The next 4 days, they got to come away with somebody. I'd be shocked if we didn't get a starting pitcher, either by free agency or a trade. Guys that we could trade for, obviously, Sandy Alcantara. Would they want to trade within the division? That's always a tricky thing. Or the big elephant in the room, Tarek Skubal. Do the Mets give away their farm system for a 1 year rental? That is the big marquee question that every Met fan has been debating online, even myself, with certain Met fans across certain platforms on Facebook and Instagram. I see all of them all over the place. The Mets being a front runner to get Skubal because they have the farm system and the pieces to get it done. That's true, they do. But again, if you're gonna make a move like that, you got to make sure that in a year you're gonna re-sign them. And I think that might be the reason why Tarek Skubal doesn't get traded, because teams like the Mets aren't going to give up their whole farm system for a 1 year rental and then have to go into a bidding war next offseason. Just doesn't really make any sense. I could see the Mets going after Freddie Peralta. That could be something that develops during the winter meetings. I can see that happening. I can see the Brewers and the Mets making a deal. It would benefit both teams really to do that, because Freddie Peralta is not going to sign a long-term deal with Milwaukee. Milwaukee doesn't do that, and the Mets need a starter. So why wouldn't you both come together and try to work something out? Freddie's a guy that David Stearns knows from his days in Milwaukee. So again, for the David Stearns disapprovers or non-believers, this is a guy that, knows Freddie Peralta and knows what he's about. So, yeah, he's going to go after the guys that he knows. That makes complete sense. Another thing I can see happening during the winter meetings is the Mets being in heavily on Kyle Tucker. And I know they already spent a crap ton of money last year on Juan Soto. How much money they going to spend, every single offseason. That's, something Met fans always tell me. Oh, you think the Mets are always going to throw all the money at the best players? Well, when you have Steve Cohen who could afford it, and Steve Cohen is embarrassed about what happened last season when the Mets didn't make the playoffs after he spent all that money on Juan Soto. Yeah, I can see Steve Cohen doing that. I can see him saying, you know what, screw it. Let me invest in another young outfielder one of the best in the game in Colin Tucker. Let me try to re-sign Pete, and then let me go with those four at the top of the lineup. I can see that happening. It's not 100% probable, but, I could see it being 40-60 that they go after Tucker, especially now that they got rid of Brandon Nemo. It makes complete sense. He's a gold glove right fielder. He would help the defense tremendously in the outfield. He's a great hitter. So, yeah, I can see the Mets 100% being in on Kyle Tucker. I could also see them being in on Cody Bellinger as well. Cody Bellinger being another guy that, because of the Brandon Nemo trade, makes a ton of sense for the New York Mets to go after, especially when you need, an outfielder that plays good defense, and you need guys to fill that lineup. Right now, the Mets are thin in the outfield because of that trade for Marcus Semien. So it makes the utmost sense to bring one of those guys in. And I really do believe that, being that they traded away Brandon Nemo, they're going to be in on these two guys. Now, whether they get these two guys is a different story. There's a possibility they go a completely different route and don't even spend a lot of money this offseason as far as the offense or the lineup, and they just go heavily with the pitching. I can see them trading for somebody too. I had two guys in particular that I thought fit the Mets perfectly, or at least what David Stearns wanted to do, and that's with this whole run prevention thing. I could see them making a trade for Stephen Kwan. Here's a guy that is a gold glove left fielder. Could be a great leadoff hitter for the Mets. You could move Lindor down to the 2 or 3 hole. He would fit really, really well at Citi Field. Excuse me there. Still getting over a cough, trying to get this episode in, because I think you guys deserve it. Luis Robert was the other guy that I thought could be a really good fit. But that would mean they were getting a center fielder, not a left fielder. So depending on where the Mets want to go with Carson Bench, who may actually get a shot at opening day, who knows? This is all dependent on what they do this week. Whatever they come out with out of the winter meetings is going to be where the Mets go as far as all these other moves. And that's why I kept preaching the importance of the winter meetings, even before the winter meetings even started. In previous shows, I kept saying, winter meetings, got to make that big move. You can't wait to get better, because then you don't, and a lot of teams are going to be in on the guys that I mentioned, especially Kyle Tucker, a guy who has been on the Mets' radar. And this is kind of interesting because I didn't think he was going to be somebody. I didn't think he was going to be on the Mets' radar. And this guy is Kyle Schwarber. Really didn't think I would hear as many reports as I've heard. And that's interesting because if the Mets go after Kyle Tucker, then I don't see them re-signing Pete Alonso. If they go after Kyle Schwarber, I also don't think that they're going after Pete Alonso. And that's obviously debatable. They can still sign one of these guys and Pete Alonso. But how much money they're going to spend, right? And that's been the argument forever is, will they add one guy and Pete Alonso, or is it just Pete Alonso? It can't just be Pete Alonso. I've said this ever since we lost to the Dodgers last year, was you're not going to beat the best team in baseball if you don't match them blow for blow, right? They tried to get cute this past season, and they didn't even make the playoffs. So, they really need to come away with a lot this upcoming week. I can't stress that enough. They either got to come away with a top of the rotation starter, or they got to come away with one of the best hitters in the open market. That's just how it is. By just bringing Pete Alonso back, your offense ain't going to be good enough. You opened yourself up to a lot of scrutiny if you don't bring Pete back and add one of these top outfielders. Either the free agents that I mentioned or one of the trade targets. It's not going to work. The fan base ain't gonna like it. I'm not gonna like it. The radio hosts in New York City aren't gonna like it. It's it's a huge week in baseball. Steve Cohen needs to make his mark like he did last year. It's as simple as that. Will the Mets trade anybody else? That's also an interesting thing that can happen. Will Jeff McNeil not be a Met? Will Mark Vientos go in a package for one of these guys? That's debatable. I think both of those guys still have some value on this team, but we'll see. You know, and not that I think any of these guys will get signed this week, but will the Mets be in on one of these Japanese players? I could see the Mets getting one of the three, whether or not it's one of the two hitters or if it's the pitcher. I personally want them to go after Amai. Um, I understand his profile is like Kodai Senga, but he's 27 years old. They're saying his fastball is electric, that he has some really good off-speed stuff as well. A slider that just plays in the major leagues. So that's exciting. But let's hope that they could re-sign Pete. Let's hope that they could surprise us and go after somebody else. I personally would love Kyle Tucker, but we'll see. I just hope David Stearns does the right thing. Bring back our boys. And you know what? I haven't forgot to bring up Edwin Diaz, the bullpen. Being that you signed Devin Williams, I hope that wasn't the close for the New York Mets. I did like the signing. I thought that it showed a lot of balls signing another former Yankee, but he was a Yankee for a year. so not really a former Yankee in terms of how Yankee fans would say it. I do feel that the Mets need to resign Edwin Diaz. Uh, it really wouldn't make much sense if we didn't resign him at this point. Uh, you got to shorten up the games. I think that's an important step. Um, and a lot rides on this offseason, right? Like, if you have a killer bullpen, you can get away with good but not great pitching. So, uh, let's hope that the winter meetings kick off with a bang. I think that they will. I think that it should be exciting. I think the Mets should be all in on everybody. I think that they should really surprise people in terms of how methodical they are. And hopefully the game plan of the whole spectrum and the whole picture that they're trying to paint will start to make some sense, because they got a lot of moves to make. So with that said, happy winter meetings. Let's hope that there's a lot of crazy signings that we could talk about as soon as possible. And that's it. All right. I will see you guys soon. Let's go Mets and stay amazing.